many of you have ever made a decision that changed your life? All of us have, okay? So if you're not raising your hand, it's just because you don't like participating in crowd things. I get it. Most of us have. Maybe it was a great decision, a decision like getting married or having kids, although some of you may argue that that wasn't a great decision. Maybe it was a job transfer that was hard on the family, but brought you to a new place, a new time, a new season. Or maybe it was a decision that changed your life, but it was more of a negative impact on your life. A decision that negatively changed and impacted the rest of your life. Maybe it was a lie that broke trust. Maybe there was a habit that has led to an addiction, a harsh word that hurt someone that you love, a broken promise that betrayed someone that you love. Maybe it was something else, and I don't bring those things up to have us rehash and carry the weight or the shame of those moments as much as I bring it up for this, because we've all had those moments where we've made decisions that have impacted the rest of our lives, and what do we do when those decisions, what do we do when in those moments that we're reminded of our mistakes and our failures and we carry the shame and the humiliation of those choices? And as we talk about leadership, where we understand that every single one of us, doesn't matter how big or how little you are, we're all leaders because we all have influence. And where we have influence, we have leadership. And so how do great leaders respond to failure? When I fail as a leader, how do I respond? When someone else fails me, how do I respond as someone with influence? Over the past few weeks, we've been in this series, learning from the greatest leader who has ever lived, because nobody has had the kind of impact throughout history that Jesus has had. And what we found each and every week is that when you watch what Jesus does, you see what great leaders do. When you watch what Jesus does, you see what great leaders do. Just look at the life of Jesus, track along and follow his life, his ministry, how he responds, how he cares for, how he loves on people, and you'll see what a great leader looks like. That's why today we're wrapping up this series looking at the response of a healthy leader. The response of a healthy leader and how that response can change the trajectory of someone's life, regardless of whether or not they have failed us. And to do that, we're going to be looking at John chapter 21. My hope is that we look at the greatest leader who has ever lived. As we look at the encounter of Jesus in his life and we see what he does, that it would change how we respond to failure, our own or somebody else's, that it would change how we respond when someone lets us down. Whether it's our kids or our spouse, a friend or a coworker or employee, that when we watch what Jesus does, it would begin to shape what we do. See, the reality is when we fail, when we make a mistake, it can often feel like life is over. It can feel like we've lost all kind of influence or impact. But Jesus shows us that the response of a healthy leader can restore someone to lead with great effectiveness again, to call someone and reignite the mission and the purpose that God has called them to in the first place. And we see this in Jesus' interactions in John 21. If you've got your Bible and you haven't turned there yet, turn to John chapter 21. It's the last book of John. If you got to Acts or Romans, you've gone too far. It's like almost towards the end of your Bible if you're trying to navigate where that is. If you don't have a Bible, I'd love to give you one. We've got some at our guest service counter out in the lobby. We'll also have it up on the screen. But John 21 starts off and it says this. It says, after this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples. Now we're picking up at the end of John's gospel, and so when he says after this, we've got to understand, what is he talking about? What is this? After what? After what happened? Well, after Peter's betrayal. After Peter denied Jesus. Let me tell you a little bit about Peter. Peter, he started off with the name Simon. And he was one of the first disciples that Jesus called, one of the fishermen that Jesus said, come and follow me. And Peter was this enthusiastic for life, a little bit, reactionary. He was a leader, and Jesus called him to be such. He said, no longer are you going to fish for fish, you're going to fish for men. You're going to lead the church. And Jesus gives him a new name, calls him Peter, that on this rock, I'm going to build my church. Peter, you're going to help lead the church. You're going to be part of that. And in John chapter 13, Jesus tells Peter, though, he says, Peter, before the rooster crows 3 times, you're going to deny me. You're going to deny me. And Peter's like, no, I'd never deny you. I would die for you. And Jesus is like, well, funny you say that. You will die for me at some point. But not yet. In fact, you will deny me 3 times. And so after Peter's failure, after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, after all of that, this is what Jesus does. And when we see how Jesus responds, we see how great leaders respond. And what we're going to look at today are 4 responses to failure from a healthy leader. And this first one may be the whole reason that God has you here today. It may just be for this one. And here it is, Jesus doesn't give up on you. So don't give up on him. Jesus doesn't give up on you, so don't give up on him. This is the response of a great leader. See, a healthy leader never gives up on someone. And while there may be consequences for our decisions and for our actions, trust might be broken, relationships may need time and real work to heal, an employee may need to be let go for the health and future of the business or the work. But a healthy leader is always going to look for ways to help others grow so that we can all get better. That's just what healthy leaders do, even if it means making hard decisions. And so in John 21, verse 1, it says, after this betrayal and Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, it says, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he revealed himself in this way. This is how it went down. Peter was with his disciples, and he's like, guys, I'm going fishing. And being the leader that he is, they're still following him. They're still hanging out with him. And they tell him in verse 3, well, we're going to go with you. But it says that night, they caught nothing. What I love about this moment is that while Peter had failed miserably, while he's still carrying the weight and the shame, still the betrayal is just lingering in the back of his mind, the other disciples are still with him and he's still leading. But we see that Peter isn't in a very healthy place. And so don't miss what Jesus does as he comes to where they're at. By the Sea of Tiberias, they're fishing. Jesus comes, he makes himself known. And the thing is Jesus could have given up on these guys. I've tried over and over. I've reminded him. I've told him. He could have yelled at them. He could have scolded them. He could have said, hey, what are you doing out here? Didn't I show you what to do? Didn't I tell you what to do? But no matter what it is that we have done, Jesus doesn't give up on us. I'm not sure if the disciples going fishing was their way of saying, well, this Jesus thing didn't work out. Let's just go back to the thing that we know. But it does stand out to me that Jesus makes it a point to redirect the disciples, their attention and their priority, their habits back to the mission that he had originally called them to. And I wonder how many of us have ever experienced frustration with something that we thought was going to be easy, like this should be a no-brainer, and yet we continue to struggle and it doesn't tend to go our way, and no matter how much effort we put at it, we just can't seem to get anywhere. You ever feel like that? I don't know about you, but for me, it tends to be pretty much every house project I try to tackle. Replacing the light fixture, putting up a ceiling fan, doing this thing or that thing. It should have taken half an hour, the whole bathroom, a couple weeks, and 50 trips to Home Depot later, and 2 years later, the bathroom's mostly done, It shouldn't have been this hard, but you run into this problem and that problem, and this is what's happening with the disciples. They go fishing. We're hungry. We don't really know what else to do. We should probably get back to fishing. I don't know what we're going to do next, and we got to make some money. It was work, but it shouldn't have been that hard for these guys, especially fishing all night. But they couldn't catch anything. Like, what's up with that? Like, not one fish. Was it really just a bad night of fishing? Had the fish really just migrated away from that area of water? I tend to believe that it was a miracle that God was keeping their nets empty, to reveal to them their emptiness without him, to reveal to them that he is still their ultimate leader, and that no matter how hard they try or what they do, they can't count on anything, but they could always count on Jesus. And this is what life is like without following the greatest leader of all times. We can try and we can try, no matter how much effort we put in, no matter how hard we work. Whether it's at home or in our job or in our marriage, it can always seem like we're just coming up short, like we're still wanting more, like we're never quite satisfied. Maybe there's an area of your life that you've been trying to navigate in your own strength, with your own wisdom, only to continually come up wanting, trying to figure out, why won't this work? And maybe, just maybe, this is Jesus trying to get your attention, to show you who he is in the midst of your needing and longing and wanting. And like the disciples who were pro-fishermen but couldn't catch any fish, what might God be trying to turn your attention back to him with? To fill the wanting and the seeking and the longing of your heart to follow him. See, it doesn't matter what you've done, Jesus won't give up on you. So don't give up on him. He's working all around you. He's making himself known. Have you been looking for him? Have you been finding him? Have you been following him? What is it that he is using to try to grab your attention and your affection? And Jesus doesn't give up on his disciples. He makes himself known right here, meeting them where they're at. Check out verse 4 through 6. He says, just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples didn't know that it was Jesus. And so they're fishing all night. They're frustrated. They can't get anywhere. Jesus shows up right where they're at in the midst of all the concern of their future and their hungry bellies and what are they going to do next? And now we can't even catch fish, and they don't even recognize him. And I think sometimes we have leaders in our life that we don't recognize, and so we write them off and we ignore them and we miss out on the unlikely leaders around us. Let me just tell you, don't do that with Jesus. Don't do that with Jesus. He'll meet you right in the middle of whatever season, whatever mistake. The question is whether or not we will listen to him, whether or not we will listen to his word and his calling to us. See, it's important to remember that just because I don't recognize Jesus in the moments of the seasons of life I'm going through, it doesn't mean that he's not there. Just because I don't recognize Jesus in the midst of my failure doesn't mean that he's not still with me. The disciples don't recognize him, but Jesus tells them, children, do you have any fish? In the original Greek, the language for children, it's this deep affection, almost like, hey, little boys, hey, boys, you don't have any fish, do you? And they answered him, no. Maybe they thought, again, they don't recognize it's Jesus. Maybe they just thought some guy wanted to buy some fish. No, we don't have anything. And Jesus said to them, cast your net on the other side of the boat, and you'll find some. So they cast it. And now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. Does that sound familiar? Have you heard that one before? Because Jesus did this like twice. This was the second time he had already done this one. A few weeks ago, when we looked at the hands of a great leader, we looked at Luke chapter 5, where Jesus does this same miracle, and the hands of Jesus inviting others to join him on the work of the ministry, to equip them and empower them. And this is when Jesus told Peter, you're no longer going to fish for fish, you're going to fish for men. You're going to be a leader, you're going to build the church, and the gates of hell won't prevail against it. And I love and find it incredible that the way Jesus first calls Peter, he now uses the same miracle, the same moment, the same experience to restore Peter to leadership and to ministry. And Jesus comes to them at the beach in the midst of their frustration, uncertainties, and fears and discouragement. They can't get anything right, and Jesus meets them right there in that moment and reminds them that with him they will always have more than they will ever need. And just like Jesus showed up for them, I believe he can and will show up for you. No matter what you've done or what season of circumstance or life you are in, Jesus wants to meet you right in that moment to make himself known. You might not recognize him right away, but he wants to remind you that there is hope that is found in a life of obedience to him. I don't know about you, but why do we settle for so much less when he's created us for so much more? I'm so grateful that we have a God who doesn't give up on us. Now, the disciples didn't recognize him until they recognized the miracle. And they're like, that's got to be Jesus. And Peter lunges into the water. Like he's just like all reaction. and leaves the disciples to just haul all these fish in. He jumps into the water, swims to Jesus, and he's like, I know him. Let's hang out. And the disciples behind dragging the fish in. And verse 9, when they had got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. And Jesus said, bring some of the fish that you've caught. And there's so much just in these two verses. But again, we see the heart and the hands of a great leader inviting their participation. Jesus had breakfast ready, but he invites them and like, hey, bring some of what you got too. And Jesus had it all figured out, but he invites them into community. He invites them into relationship, and he says, come have breakfast. Come and relax. I also want to point out the charcoal fire, because it doesn't seem like a significant thing, but that charcoal fire, it's only actually mentioned twice in the whole New Testament that we're given the type of fire that it was. It was a charcoal fire. This is one place. The only other place it is mentioned is in John 18 when Peter actually denied Jesus 3 times. And so the charcoal fire would have reminded Peter of his failure. Maybe the last time he was by a charcoal fire was when he denied Peter. And so the smell of it and the sight of it would have maybe rushed all of those emotions and thoughts back to mind. But Jesus doesn't do this to be cruel to Peter. He does it to restore and redeem the moment. As Peter's heart aches with the reminder of his denial, we actually see in Luke 22 that records the moment after Peter's denial. It says that Peter wept bitterly. He was so ashamed, so heartbroken. How do we deal with those moments when we fail? How do leaders deal with that? This charcoal fire is reminding Peter of that night not so long ago where he failed, but Jesus redeems the fire and calls Peter to not give up just because he made a mistake. And this is what healthy leaders do. Jesus begins to offer forgiveness. See, Jesus offers you forgiveness when you fail. And he calls us to do the same with the relationships that we have around us. When people fail us, when people let us down, are we able to forgive? Are we willing to forgive? I don't know about you, but there are some people, there are some spouses and leaders that when they're offended or betrayed or let down or hurt, end up never letting the offense go. Unable, unwilling to forgive. And it begins to eat away at them from the inside out. And as it eats away at the inside, it begins to leak out in their everyday leadership. And so what you begin to see is someone that grows in insecurity and suspicion of the intentions and motivations of others. You see a leader that is full of self-protection and authority because they don't trust. Because they've been unwilling to forgive, which means they can't carry the heart of a great leader. They can't be the hands of a great leader, caring for and loving for and seeking the benefit of others. In his book titled Lead, author and pastor Paul David Tripp makes the point, there are no lasting relationships without forgiveness. And maybe this is the one piece of truth that God has brought you here for today. Maybe it was to know that God doesn't give up on you. Maybe it's to be reminded that the relationships that you have, the influence that you have, they don't last without forgiveness. Your ability to influence others is directly connected to your ability to overlook or forgive an offense. And this doesn't mean that we ignore it, pretend like it never happened, forgive and forget. But it's a choice that says I'm no longer going to hold the wrong that someone did against them. I'm going to set them free from the obligation to get back at them. And in the wake of our mistakes and our poor choices, Jesus responds with one final question. It's the last question that we see Jesus ask while on this earth, and so I think it's probably an important one. Watch what Jesus does, and you'll see what great leaders do. John 21:15. And when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Commentators, theologians will debate on what is he talking about when he says these. Is he talking about the fish and his old job? Do you love me more than your old job? Do you love me more than these fish? And going back to that, others believe it. Do you love me more than these other disciples? Are you the best disciple? Are you the better disciple? Do you love me more? I tend to think it is more general than all of that, but includes those things as well. I tend to believe it's more, Peter, do you love me more than anything else? These fish, these people, these emotions, these feelings, do you love me more? And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Then feed my lambs." Jesus said a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said to him, "Then tend my sheep." And he said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was grieved because he said it a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything, and you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." And we get these interactions and moments of the greatest leader who ever lived, asking the same question 3 times. But he's not criticizing Peter. He's not giving Peter a verbal lashing. He's just reminding Peter, what is it that matters most to you? And this is the third thing that great leaders, healthy leaders do. Jesus asks me to choose. He's not going to force me to do anything, and great leaders aren't going to force you to do something. They're just going to ask you to choose. Do you want to work here? Do you want to get on board with what we're trying to do, or are you going to walk away? But you have to choose. And Jesus is asking you, he's asking me, he's asking Peter here, you've got to choose. What do you love more? And he's not condemning Peter, he's restoring him. See, whenever possible, great leaders will respond to failure, their failure or someone else's, with an opportunity for restoration. An opportunity to mend the relationship, to choose. Will you take responsibility, learn from it, and grow from it, or will you blame shift and fight against the transformation? See, great leaders understand, great leaders know that failure is a prerequisite for success. But you got to choose. Are you going to learn and grow, or are you going to walk away? Jesus reminds Peter, you're a leader. Do you love me? Yes. Okay, then let's get back on mission. Do you love me? Yes. And he asks the question 3 times to restore the 3 denials that Peter had made. I think it's important to notice that great leaders, they don't ignore problems, they address them. But healthy leaders, they address them with compassion and hopes of restoration. But at the end of the day, we have to choose. Where are we going to be? Who are we going to serve? When we seek to restore relationships, to restore leadership, to clarify expectation and mission, you're making room for someone's failures to become their future success. But it starts with a clarifying choice. Do you know what you're signing up for? Do you know what you're getting into? And all of us here today who call ourselves followers of Jesus, Jesus is asking you to choose. Choose today. And he'll clarify his leadership. He'll clarify his expectations, his mission for your life. And he'll ask you, is he more important than the rest of this world? Do you love Jesus more than your job? Do you love Jesus more than your dreams? Do you love him more than your money, more than your comfort, more than being right, or more than getting your way? And if so, then he's got some expectations and a mission that he's called you to. We ought not waste our time getting back to it. See, to Jesus, your past mistakes, they don't disqualify you from your future purpose. They can be a prerequisite for your success. Because when we fail, when we make mistakes, we get to be reminded and understand the depths of God's love. We get to be reminded that he's a God who forgives, who doesn't give up, who calls me to make a choice. He won't force me. And he calls me to live for and follow him. See, Jesus doesn't say, if you love me, then show me how much you love me by how good you worship. Show me how much you love me by how much you can obey my commandments. No, he says, show me your love by following me and making my mission your mission. If you love me, feed my lambs, tend my sheep, take care of what I care about. If you love me, you will carry the heart and the hands of a leader to wherever you have influence. If you love me, then influence others and care for them, for their needs. See, healthy leaders don't let past mistakes cripple them from becoming the leader that God has called them to be. Have I failed? Absolutely. And you know what? I will again. But because my God doesn't give up on me, because I know he forgives me, I can be restored. And I can get back to the work that he's called me to do. And I can be faithful in it. The final thing that we see in this interaction with Peter is how Jesus calls him back to leadership. He's got to call him to choose. He's got to remind him, I haven't given up on you. I forgive you. See, when you watch what Jesus does, you see what great and healthy leaders do. And every time someone has an encounter with Jesus, they are left with the choice. Will you follow him or will you walk away from him? Take a look at John 21. Verse 21. When Peter saw John, he said to Jesus, Lord, what about this man? And Jesus said to him, if it is my will that he remains until I come, what is that to you? See, Peter is there, he's talking with Jesus, and Jesus tells him, look, if you love me, then let's get back to work. And Peter's like, all right, great. And Jesus says, because you are going to die for me. You're not going to deny me again. You're going to live for me, and this is what it means. And then Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, which is the author of this book, John, the disciple that Jesus loved. He just likes to remind us that he's the one that Jesus loved. And Jesus and Peter are talking, but John's following, and so Peter's like, well, I'm going to die for my faith, and I'm cool with that. What about John, though? And Jesus just says, if it's my will that John remains until I come, what is that to you? At the end of the day, Peter, you just follow me. See, it's like what my mom used to do with me when I was growing up and I'd get distracted or I would think something was unfair at home. And she's like, don't worry about them. I'm talking to you, right? You worry about you. I think I said that like 5 times this weekend with my kids. We were home for like 5 days. They had off school and stuff. And I'm like, no, don't worry about what your sister's doing. Don't worry about worry about you. I'm talking to you right now. And Jesus is telling Peter, don't worry about what others are doing. Don't worry about them. I'm talking to you. You just worry about following me. Don't worry about what other people are doing around you. Don't worry about whether or not you think that they're living for Jesus like you think they should be living for Jesus. You just worry about you following Jesus. And this is the last response we see of a healthy leader. Jesus is calling you. He's calling you. Will you follow him? And while we may live and make comparisons with others and get distracted with thoughts like, they don't love God or obey God like I do. Or you know what, I won't ever be good enough. If God only knew, if other people knew the mistakes I've made, the things I've done, they'd never love me or want me or respect me. But you know what great leaders do? Great leaders see in others what they often can no longer see in themselves. And he calls them to something greater. Peter was stuck in the shame of his failure, trying to compare himself with others, but Jesus was pulling him out of his past and calling him to focus on his future as a leader. Don't let that thing hold you down. Don't let that thing keep you back. God still has a plan for you. And when we're tempted by life to compare with other people, when I'm tempted to grab onto power over love, to hold on to control over embracing the cross, when I just want to lead instead of being led, Jesus gives us a second chance and calls us to commit our future and our influence with others and our leadership to him. Because it's only when we follow Jesus, the greatest leader who has ever lived, that we can become better leaders ourselves. It may go without saying, but I think we often forget it. This following Jesus thing, it's not a one-time choice. I don't know about you, but I fail at it. I get distracted and I do what I want and I go my own way. In the Greek, when Jesus commands Peter to follow me, that Greek word follow me, it's a present imperative, which simply means it's continual. It's not a one and done. It's a progressive, ongoing. In other words, Peter, keep on keeping on. Keep on following me. Don't stop just because it gets hard. Don't give up just because you messed up. Healthy leaders understand something, that there is never a finish line. There is always growth. There is always more to learn, to grow in, to understand other areas of influence, to infiltrate. And I don't ever arrive as a leader. I just continue to grow and get better as a leader. But I have to understand, it all starts with following Jesus, the greatest leader. And that's exactly what what Peter did. Peter followed Jesus from this day forward. And you study the life of Peter and you will find that not only did he follow Jesus, he never again betrayed Jesus, denied Jesus. In fact, he went to the cross and died himself for his faith in Jesus. Nothing was ever going to get in the way or stop Peter from following Jesus ever again. What about you? Will you follow Jesus like that? For some of us here today that are experiencing the weight of past or maybe even present mistakes and failures, you may be flooded with shame and regret, humiliation, and the consequences of your choices. But I hope you hear today that when you mess up, God does not give up. He will meet you right where you're at, and he will extend forgiveness, and he wants to restore you and call you back to follow him again. And so no matter what you're going through, don't give up. Don't stop now. God is giving you a second chance. And he's asking, do you love me more? Do you love me most? Because if you truly love me, then you'll answer the call to follow me and to lead others to follow me as well. When we see what great leaders do, we get to follow their example. As I wrap up, let me just close with this. Let me give us the secret. You want the secret to leadership? You want the secret to leadership? Okay. I'm not convinced, but I'll tell you anyways. Listen. There is no strategy, there is no system that can change you or your ability to lead. There might be some motivations that shift. There might be some expectations that change a little bit. There might be a routine or habits that we force ourselves into to do something different, but they won't actually change you. They might change a behavior. They won't change you, see, because only Jesus can change you. This is why Jesus made it really clear for Peter. Do you love me more? Because there'll be plenty of things in life that try to grab your attention and derail you and get you off track. I want to know, do you love me more? Because only I can change your life. Only I can change your heart. Only I can change your eternity. And if you're here today, and for the first time or the first time in a long time, you're saying, you know what, I've been going my own way. I've gotten distracted. I've tried to change on my own, and I just keep falling back into the same habits, the same thought patterns, the same failures and mistakes. And I'm still weighed down by the shame, the guilt, I invite you today with the same question that Jesus invited Peter with. Will you love Jesus more? What I love about that is that it doesn't mean that I have to be perfect. It just means that I have to be progressively pursuing Jesus. And he will continually change and transform me from the inside out. So we have a God who will not give up on you, who extends forgiveness, who invites you to make a choice, and who calls you to follow him no matter what. And I invite you to make that decision today. If you're here and you want to make that decision, if you're here and you're saying, look, I'm done trying to do it on my own, make this your prayer between you and God and say, God, I need you. And I'm a sinner. My failures and my mistakes keep me from you. They keep me feeling helpless and hopeless. But I thank you that your love chases me down and offers hope and forgiveness. That you are a God who will not give up on me, no matter how many times I've given up on you. And so today, make this your prayer between you and Jesus. Say, Jesus, I accept that you are my Savior. I believe that you are my Savior. I want to follow you as the Lord of my life from this day forward. Would you forgive me? Would you help me follow you and you alone? Leaving everything else behind. Today I say, Jesus, I trust you. I love you more than anything else. And I surrender my life to you today. In Jesus' name, amen.